But we begin with Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts on the North Lawn and what led to this monumental decision. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. He was cautioned not to do it by advisors and world leaders alike, but today President Trump insisted 22 years of doing the same thing in Israel has yielded nothing in terms of peace, so he is going to shake it up. For decades, U.S. presidential candidates have pledged they would be the one to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Today, Donald Trump became the first one as president to say he is going to do it.
Today, we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. Consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
During the campaign, President Trump's opponents ridiculed him as no friend of Israel, despite the president pointing out he was once the Grand Marshal of the Israel Day Parade. So candidate Trump adopted a forceful platform that, if elected, he would buck years of U.S. policy and make the move.
When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one. We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
What to do about the embassy sparked months of intense debate at the White House. Rex Tillerson, James Mattis, and H.R. McMaster all promoted the status quo. Jared Kushner is said to have wanted to use it as a chit to help broker a peace deal. In Congress, Nancy Pelosi, who voted for the 1995 law stipulating the embassy be moved, today said actually moving it is a terrible idea. That, quote, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem now may needlessly spark mass protests, fuel tensions, and make it more difficult to reach a durable peace. Her Democratic colleague, Congressman Eliot Engel of New York, on the other hand, thinks the time is right.
There's no doubt in my mind that Israel's capital is Jerusalem, and I think what the president did was the right thing.
In announcing the move, President Trump insisted he is still firmly committed to helping find peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
I intend to do everything in my power to help forge such an agreement. Without question, Jerusalem is one of the most sensitive issues in those talks. The United States would support a two-state solution if agreed to by both sides.
And he urged both sides to do nothing to inflame the situation on the ground.
I call on all parties to maintain the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites, including the Temple Mount, also known as Haram al-Sharif.
Despite the president's assurances that nothing in regard to U.S. policy on borders and territory will change, the administration is still preparing for possible trouble. The State Department issuing travel warnings for government employees and American visitors in the region, while the Pentagon is dispatching U.S. Marine fast teams to embassies in the region to beef up security. Moving the embassy is also an important political move for President Trump. It helps shore up support among Jewish voters, many of whom were skeptical of him during the campaign last year. It also throws a huge bone to his evangelical base, one pastor saying that in the eyes of evangelicals, President Trump has historically stepped into immortality. Brett?
John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. Donald Trump is not the first presidential candidate to promise to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, but as president, he is the first to actually take steps to do it. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen, our resident historian, shows us how we got here.
As smoke rises over Jerusalem.
Since Israel's founding, 12 successive presidents have struggled through a series of wars and peace processes to solve the Rubik's Cube that is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, central to which has always been the fate of Jerusalem. The difficulty compounded after Israel, with its victory in the Six-Day War of 1967, unified the Holy City.
Every president for the last number of presidents, large number, they've come in and they were going to do it, and then all of a sudden they decide they don't want to get involved.
The Democratic Convention platforms of 1972 and 76 advocated for Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and as a congressman, Gerald Ford had done so. But neither Mr. Ford nor Jimmy Carter pushed the idea as president.
do solemnly swear.
Bill Clinton did pledge to move the embassy, but when Congress overwhelmingly approved a measure in 1995 mandating it happen by May 31st, 1999, the president allowed it to become law without his signature, citing pending peace initiatives.
As soon as I take office, I will begin the process of moving the United States ambassador to the city of Israel, as chosen as its capital.
That promise also went by the boards. Elliot Abrams, who worked the issue throughout the Bush-Cheney era, explained why.
I think President Bush and President Obama and President Clinton were persuaded by two things. Number one, a lot of pressure from the State Department. And secondly, by what I'd call threats of violence. If you do this, there'll be rioting, there'll be terrorism, and it will be your fault. The whole Arab world will go up in smoke if you do this.
Abrams said he believes those same warnings had a reverse effect on President Trump, who by temperament and as a longtime billionaire tends to bristle when told what he can and cannot do. Like his predecessors, Mr. Trump at first issued the 6-month waiver, putting off the relocation. But ultimately, as in the case of the Iran nuclear deal, where he at first issued a certification, this president defied the warnings and threats from overseas allies. Brett?
More on all this with the panel. James, thank you. No country currently has its embassy in Jerusalem, and around the world, leaders' reaction to the president's move has been intense. Correspondent Connor Powell has that part of the story from Jerusalem.
As word spread that President Trump planned to formally recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, Palestinians expressed their anger. In Bethlehem, Muslims and Christians alike burned photos of Mr. Trump, while several hundred people gathered in a peaceful protest in Gaza as Palestinian leaders called for 3 days of rage. In a televised statement, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas saying tonight that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, and that with this unilateral move, America has withdrawn from its role in the peace process.
This decision by President Trump is clearly one of the most irresponsible decisions taken by American presidents vis-à-vis the region and the chances of peace.
Israelis, however, celebrated the announcement, lighting up the walls of the old city with images of the American flag and thanked President Trump.
This decision reflects the president's commitment to an ancient but enduring truth, to fulfilling his promises, and to advancing peace.
The White House is still insisting it will pursue peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. But critics of today's declaration say the failure to recognize Palestinians' aspiration for their capital in East Jerusalem undercut the peace process. World leaders have condemned the Trump policy and called the U.S. move a massive blow to Middle East peace.
It's going to be a grave mistake. Grave mistake. It will not bring any stability, peace, but rather chaos to the region.
In his weekly address, Pope Francis called for authorities to respect worshipers of all faith in Jerusalem, a sentiment also stressed by President Trump tonight in his speech. Shortly after President Trump made his announcement, British Prime Minister Theresa May issued a statement breaking with the White House, calling President Trump's move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital unhelpful in the pursuit of peace. Brett?
Connor Powell live in Jerusalem tonight. Connor, thank you.